I felt that this was the most meaningful thing I had ever done in my life. I had almost stopped working. The pandemic had largely shut down the work that I had been doing the last few years. Um, so I was able to really focus, and I took a leave of absence from my job during those last months. Um, but I felt in a way that my entire life had led up to this, and I've done all these cool projects in my life, but that helping Lynn die with grace was the most meaningful thing I had ever done, and it just gave me great joy.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. I am excited for you guys to listen in today as I chat with Tony Stewart. He is the author of Carrying the Tiger. And I am you're the author of your own writing, basically. It's a compilation of your writings, and I can't wait to find out more about how it came about. But it is your very heartfelt story, real time, really, of your own memoir of going through the death of your then wife, Lynn. And so I am happy to have you here on the podcast, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Kendra. I'm very happy to be here with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, and it's nice to be able to hold space and say the names of those that we are remembering and honoring. Not because the book is not only really about you sharing your story and your process, right, of going through your wife's diagnosis and death, but also really a way of carrying her legacy through in this book. Would you say?
I think absolutely. I've been taking a course to become a certified grief educator, which I never would have imagined that I would do. But I've started it actually since I began promoting Carrying the Tiger and having conversations like this. And I found it so rewarding to talk about what Lynn and I went through, and then my grief, and then how I came out of grief, which I know is very much like the title of your podcast.
Mhm.
Uh, I found it so rewarding that I've actually decided that this is something I want to know more about and want to be able to keep doing. So, in a way, this whole project is about making meaning out of what I lost and carrying Lynn's memory in my heart, carrying Lynn in my heart and going forward and trying to do something useful for other people as a result.
You know, I love that you're saying that because it's a lot of times when we go through really hard things, it's hard to first off, when we're in the midst of it, we don't like to hear about the silver linings. We don't like people to be saying, well, at least, or na na na, or all these kind of things that just make it be like, no, that is not not what I need to hear. And but really when we've gone through something,
Mm-hmm.
there are so many beautiful things that can be born of that. In like what you're saying right now, of you even wanting to learn more about being a grief educator, this would have not even happened had you not been through the grief you went through, right? So there's these learnings and growth that come from it if we want if we want it to
If we
be that
want it.
way.
If we want it. I certainly wouldn't say to everyone listening to our conversation, oh, after suffering a terrible loss, you should run out and become, or a few years after, you should run out and become a grief educator. That's crazy. Some subset of us find that that's how we want to make meaning. There's a whole book called Finding Meaning by David Kessler of grief.com, who's teaching the course that I'm taking. And so I've read his book, and it's all about how the last stage of, well, making something good out of your loss that you're going to live with and carry forward, is usually most of us try to find some meaning in it. And and that can be totally different for everyone. In your case, here you are hosting a
With a
podcast.
podcast, exactly.
Exactly. And in
And
my
in your
case,
case, that you wrote a book.
I wrote a book. I wrote a book. And then I found that to be such a rewarding process. And then sharing it with the world, even more rewarding than I ever anticipated, that now I'm thinking, wow, there's more here than I could have imagined, and I want to keep going. Without knowing at this minute, between you and me, I don't know who I'll be next year, but I want to keep trying.
And sometimes people that even take these courses are there to really learn even more about their own grief a lot of times. And then in the process of understanding their own grief end up realizing, "Oh my goodness, there are so many other people that are going through this that I can help as well to navigate," which is why a lot of us end up doing what we do. It's because it does feel so isolating. So let's talk about your grief itself and the creation of the book.
Hmm.
Um, it's gonna be a little jumping around because of course people will have to read the book to really know fully everything about it, but we'll be jumping in and out of the story line of your life with Lynn as well as developing the book. So when Lynn passed, she passed in 2021, is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct,
February.
2021. Her diagnosis was her process was what, a
Sev
7-year
Six
process?
and a half 6.5 years. We were incredibly lucky, considering that from the minute we knew about it, she had stage 4 non-smoker's lung cancer, and there's no cure. We were incredibly lucky because most people with this diagnosis, even with chemo, even with some of the best drugs that are out there, die in less than 2 years. But we stumbled into a clinical trial of something that worked really well for Lynn and basically held down her lung tumors for an extra 4 or 5 years. And that's how we had as much time as we had to go through uh, the initial fear, terror, navigating the healthcare system, trying to figure out what are we going to do, how are we going to get more time. We moved past that because it turned out we got more time, which is a blessing, and we went into several years of learning to live with her cancer and what that felt like for us. So I should back up. So Carrying the Tiger is the book, and the first part of it is subtitled, or at least on the cover, it says Living with Cancer. It's in 3 parts: living with cancer, dying with grace, finding joy while grieving. And that first part is about our journey, those first 4 or 5 years.
As you were navigating. And the process of accompanying somebody going through grief through their own mortality is not only are you navigating your grief, but as you're walking alongside someone with a diagnosis and seeing their own process, how was that for you and how was that for Lynn of her own grief journey? Because, well, since you're taking Kessler's course, he probably has talked about a little bit of the 5 stages of grief, of how that particular aspect was mainly for someone who is confronted with death, how someone that's confronted with death, how they go through their own stages. Did you did you see a lot of the different processes and emotions show up in Lynn in her journey?
Um, Not quite like that. I would first of all, Kessler himself, even having co-written the book about
Yeah,
stages of grief, would be very quick to
he
tell you we don't
yeah,
go through
me
those
too.
in some
I
natural process.
completely
Everyone is different, etc. But that
absolutely. Yeah, that's something I say this all the time in the podcast. I'm like, I actually don't I'm like, I don't think I've ever reached this one at all, or
right,
it's not a yeah, it's not a
it
process,
doesn't
it's
work
just
that
something.
way, and he
Right,
is
it
quick to
is.
tell you
Yeah.
that.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yes.
but so if we wind back to the day that the phone rang and the doctor called and said, "Lynn, you've got tumors," which shattered us. Um, we reacted according to our personalities, kind of very very differently. I mean, we'd been together 29 years at that point, very tight. Um, and Lynn was an artist, a painter. And that's a big part of her personality. Very open, very warm, a lot of friends. And I had done all these different things. I'd made movies for a while. I developed computer software. I ran big projects. Very different life and personality than Lynn. And how we responded in the first couple of weeks was kind of reflects our personalities. I started Googling like crazy. Like, okay, what are we going to do here? I'm like project planning. Who's the best doctor we can get to, starting with the one our that our GP referred us to, but then, okay, can we get a second opinion? What else is out there? Things like that. And in the course of doing all of this Googling, I was reading many, many cancer related websites where people would post their own stories. And there are a lot of very sad stories. And people would post about their treatment and say, it stopped working and now I don't know where to turn. I could deal with this because I was like focused type A, left brain versus right brain, whatever you want to call it. I could deal with this because I was just skimming past those emotionally difficult things and looking for the information I needed. The minute Lynn, who was actually living with incurable cancer, started seeing that, it tore her apart. She got scared, and basically she and her doctor said, I'm not reading these websites. I'm not going on the computer about this. And what she did was focus on living her life, which I highly recommend. Um, Everything we did for the next few years was about enabling Lynn to live her life as fully as possible, despite having this death sentence hanging over her. She went to her studio and painted. We started posting on CaringBridge, which is a private. CaringBridge.org is a website where you can set up a private, like Facebook sort of thing, to communicate with your friends when you're going through something like this. We set up a private site where we could post and communicate with Lynn's many friends. I call them Lynn's friends because 90% of them came from her. Classic male-female kind of partnership. Um, but I wrote many of the posts.
I that sounds familiar, by the way. My husband, he edits this. He'll admire the honesty on your part too.
So I was writing posts every day or two about what had happened, the doctors we had seen, things like that, purely to keep our friends informed. And I should say this is actually the origin seed for the book, even though I had no idea at the time that there would ever be a book. These were for our friends. Um, and this allowed Lynn not to have to write those posts, although she did read all of them. And when we published them, she would sit with me and we would see the comments come back from our friends, which might be just simple things like, we're with you, or, oh, that sounds hard, or good luck tomorrow. And they gave us huge strength because we were constantly aware that this community of friends knew what we were going through. But the upshot was that when she saw them in person, because she wasn't bedridden, in and out of hospital several times, but she was leading her life in between. When she saw her friends in person, she didn't have to talk with them about her cancer. They didn't have to ask her about her cancer. They had read it. They had read it. This was a huge gift that we didn't anticipate.
That is genius right now what you're saying, and it's because so many times somebody that's going through that, not only themselves but the people around them, don't know how to interact with them, and so this also just gave space for these other moments in her life to just be quote unquote normal and
Yes.
talk about the weather if she wanted to. That's
Yeah, she would show up. On the days she felt really crummy, she wouldn't go out. And when you read Carrying the Tiger, you will find long sections where I say Lynn hasn't left the house in 3 days. She's been feeling so crummy. That happened. But in between, when she had the energy, when she could, which she wanted to, she would go to her painting studio and paint. She would go downtown to art openings and things and see her friends. And she would walk in with this big smile, and friends, even reading the posts, didn't realize what an effort it took because this is how she wanted to project and interact with them. And they would talk about the paintings they were looking at or what their friends were up to, things like that. At home, Lynn had never, prior to this, liked watching TV. And we cuddled on the couch every night and watched shows on Netflix or whatever. It was just, this is what she wanted. This is escapism at night, painting in her studio, seeing her friends, and letting me communicate with everyone about her cancer. That was basically
The way that
the
she
way
the
that
way
she
and
navigated it.
navigate it, and the way that then you helped her in that process too by you being the voice and being the one that would write. Now,
Yes.
so for you, as you are then, I always ask like people's tools as they're navigating grief. You then were writing throughout all this time and being able to process. So that was one of the tools as you're processing it. Then when she passed, did that continue then being, of course, you have the book, but I mean, did that continue being then what you were doing as well in order to process your grief after her passing?
Yes. And I will say that the whole first 5 years, I wouldn't think of it, although I wouldn't think of it as processing my grief for those first 5 years. We
It
were
was
living in hope that we were gonna have an unknown number of good years together. Yes, there's anticipatory grief that is hanging over you the whole time. Yes, I was having all kinds of difficult emotions and feelings during those years, but it isn't the same as the grief feelings that came later. It's more of the what it's like to be a caregiver and what it's like to live with cancer, which would be a different podcast conversation. Um, During those 5 or 6 years, as I wrote and wrote and wrote, I kept getting these responses from friends encouraging me. I would say encouraging me to be more open, but what actually happened was I felt more and more like what I wanted to talk about was our emotional feeling of what it was like, especially when we weren't chasing a new doctor that day, when the drugs were working or kind of working, and but we were getting really depressed. One day I put up a post about how we were getting really depressed. It just felt like slogging through a swamp. And this was a watershed post for me because I almost didn't publish it. I had never written anything like that. It had been more factual. And now I didn't have anything factual to say. Nothing has changed, but it feels really crummy. And I got back these wonderful comments from friends saying basically, thank you for sharing what's really happening. It's not only good news. So that sort of thing happened. Then eventually, the drugs stopped working, stopped holding down the cancer grew. Lynn decided eventually, after a very tough year, 2020, to go for home hospice, to stop treating, to die at home. And now, of course, we really knew this is it. Our journey is coming to an end. And I found I couldn't stop writing. I was writing during those weeks of home hospice, which was also during COVID. Um, we did have aides coming in to help, but we were very isolated in the sense of, there weren't a lot of visitors coming through the apartment. Uh, I was waking up in the middle of the night, night after night, and writing posts about what that felt like, day by day. And it was such a special time. I mean, if you've ever had the gift, the blessing of accompanying someone you love through his or her final weeks, it is miraculous. It is those are the best 2 weeks of my life. The best 2 weeks of my life.
I love that you're saying that because it is not so often. I felt that, well, with my mom, we were present when she passed, and it was something that was just I felt it was one of the most spiritual experiences that
Yes.
I have witnessed. Now, it's not necessarily the case for everyone probably, but it was for me. So to hear that for you, it was also, please talk more about that of why did it feel that way?
Um, multiple levels. Uh, First, I became the most true caregiver I had ever been because she was losing her body, her and so increasingly I felt like I was bathing her. I was helping her to and from the toilet, and then when she couldn't make it to the toilet, to and from the commode, and then when she couldn't get out of bed, we had a female urinal that I would hold against her. She'd wake me in the middle of the night and say, I need to pee. And I would hold this against her and stroke her leg and breathe the scent of her leg. And I felt so close to her. Just this physical caring. Um, Meanwhile, we were having conversations in the first until she couldn't anymore because the tumors were going into her brain at that point. And even though the hospice only lasted a few weeks, um, She was steadily regressing in her ability to talk, to find words. Her energy was disappearing, all of that. But in the first week or two, we had these conversations about, what does it feel like to know you are dying? She was with me and actively dying and knew it. And she didn't say anything especially amazing or profound that you would quote in a book, although I quoted what she said. She said small things like, I can't believe this is really happening. And I'm going to miss you, and I'm going to miss the cats. She gave me permission to have another girlfriend, which was huge later on. Um, and then as she drifted away into this place she was going, she said a few things in the last few days of her life when she was hardly talking anymore. One time, the last time uh, that I tried to give her water, which at that point we were down to a few drops out of an eyedropper into her mouth, uh, she finally closed her mouth and wouldn't. This was the first time, I would say finally, as in after the 2 weeks, we had reached the point where she didn't want water. And we had agreed way at the beginning of this, we talked about, Lynn, I said, when you reach the point that you're ready to go, just stop eating. I'll know what you mean. We're not going to force anything on you. And she had already stopped eating, and now she stopped drinking. And what she said was, suddenly, don't bother me. I've got a lot to do. Those are her last words. It was about 2 days before she died, or one day. Don't bother me. I've got a lot to do. She was lying there, mostly looking at the ceiling in some place that she was traveling to.
That you this is something I know that this is not what this conversation is about, but that aspect of what happens after we die,
Hmm.
that what you're saying about a lot to do. My sister dreamt with my mom, and it was something it was one, and I hope my sister's okay with me sharing, but she asked her like, "Mom, do you miss us?" Like, it was like something is like, "I do, but I am so busy. I have so much to do." And another friend whose friend died when she was really young, like 18, this friend's dad also dreamt something similar like that, and it was that his daughter was, like, with, like, a pay like a bucket kind of thing and putting, like, things on it, and she was like, "No, I'm so busy, there's so much work to do." Again, it's all this continuing of the souls of just and it brings so much comfort to some extent to know that that energy and that they're however we wanna say about what our soul is, but that
Yeah.
that energy continues to influence in some shape or form our own reality, and that it continues to have an impact in our lives. I think it's so comforting, right?
Yes. I found it incredibly comforting, as well as
Wow,
like mysterious and spiritual,
mysterious.
but
Yeah.
mysterious. What is this lot to do that she's lying absolutely still on the bed? She's stopped moving. She's looking up at the ceiling most of the time, sometimes at me. She was still responding physically when I had to roll her over so that the aide could wipe her bottom, things like that. And she actually kind of clung to me still. She was able to do that. And then she passed. Then she went. Um,
Mm,
makes me want to
wow.
cry. I would wish that we could all, as the loved ones left behind, have that experience. I was so lucky because, of course, you can die in a hospital, you can die in a car crash, you can die in the middle of the night unexpectedly. All these things happen. In this case, I got to experience what I call in the subtitle, the second subtitle of Carrying the Tiger, dying with grace, living with cancer, then dying with grace.
Tony, I I know that for your experience of being a caretaker and really for the love of love of your life and literally your life because she had been someone you'd been for when she passed it had been 29 years you guys had been together.
By the time she passed, it was more like 35.
35 years. Oh my god. Oh, so 29 by the time, so 35 years this has been the person that you've been with. And for you to be a caretaker was the ultimate way of showing that love back to her, if
Yes.
in your case. A lot of times caretakers, it could be the other way around. A lot of times, depending on our personalities, things come up in us that are maybe not the prettiest the prettiest, the impatience. I know that I always say this even when my kids are sick. I'm like, "I'm not the best. I'm not the best caretaker
Mhm.
when someone's sick, because 'cause I'm like, "I want you to get better. Take this. Take this, it's gonna make," and if the person doesn't take it, I'm like, I get frustrated, right?
Yeah.
So right, so all these other emotions that I find out about myself in that process. So it's just so beautiful to see that you really were so selfless and just really focusing on her during that time, and that's what was so cathartic and life-changing for you.
Yes. I felt that this was the most meaningful thing I had ever done in my life. I had almost stopped working. The pandemic had largely shut down the work that I had been doing the last few years. Um, so I was able to really focus, and I took a leave of absence from my job during those last months. Um, but I felt in a way that my entire life had led up to this, and I've done all these cool projects in my life, but that helping Lynn die with grace was the most meaningful thing I had ever done, and it just gave me great joy.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Tony. Tony, as I want to hear more about how you guys met. If you can share your own story, your own love story of how you met. And then now, as you are now in this new stage of your life of now meeting, of being with someone and getting to find love again, kind of weave that in and honoring Lynn's memory as well. Tell us how you guys met.
I'm laughing because I feel like, well, I could write a 300-page book just to answer that question.
Oh, really? Well,
But
I don't have 300
no,
pages
we don't
worth
have
of
300
a
pages.
podcast, but
So, when Lynn and I met, I was 29 years old. I had been married in my 20s, and had my wife had left me amicably. I was on the rebound, and I was trying to prove to myself that I was still an attractive guy, and that my life wasn't over. Uh, it happened that Lynn and I both swam at the Columbia University swimming pool at the same time of day every day, swam there for exercise. At that point, I was swimming under semi false pretenses because it was my ex wife who had the alumni relationship. Turned out later, Lynn was also there under false pretenses, pretending to be someone else. And I
what? What was hers? I need to hear that. What was hers? What was she pretending to
she
be?
and
Was she
uh, a friend of hers had gone to Barnard, which is part of
in
Columbia
a school?
University
Mhm.
up here, and Lynn had gotten a master's downtown at NYU. Now, Lynn was living right next to Columbia. Her friend was living downtown next to NYU, and they swapped identities enough so that each could go to the other person, pretend to be the other person, and get like a cheap.
That's just well, yeah, but that's
You
genius.
can't
I mean,
do it anymore. The world has
no,
changed.
yes,
This was
yes, it
before
has,
photo.
but
The ID was a piece of cardboard. You know.
but it was smart in case if they
Yeah.
lived near to the other ones.
So I met Lynn because I noticed one day that she crossed in front of me in the lane in the swimming pool. Stopped at the end, and I said to her, "Why were you swimming in that lane over there? You usually swim in this other one to my right." The lanes were sort of organized by speed, and she said, "Well, I went to the slower lane to use my kickboard." Didn't say anything else to each other. The next day, she was at the end of the lane in the swimming pool doing some leg stretches, and I stopped and talked to her again, and we started to have a real conversation. And the twist to this is, I was talking to like every pretty girl I could. It didn't matter. I was noticing them, talking to them. I would have said the same thing to anyone else who was crossing in front of me and was a
You just
woman
wanted,
of
as
eligible
Austin
age.
Powers would say, it's like you still had your mojo,
Yeah, I
like
wanted to
you
prove
just
that.
wanted to prove you still had it.
And Lynn was older than me, and at a point when she thought she was never going to be in another serious relationship, and like looked up, her eyes widened, or as metaphorically, and like, this guy has been paying so much attention to me. So she deliberately stopped and did those leg stretches the next day to give me a chance to talk to her. She never did leg stretches, and it worked, but she didn't know that I would have talked that way to anybody.
Oh
That
my goodness.
that is how we met.
That's how you
And then
met, and that how long after did you marry?
we married 3 years later, 2.5 years later.
Wow.
Um, and we
That's
were,
fantastic. Now
yeah.
together, in those 35 years that you guys were together, had you ever experienced other types of grief or grief as a couple that you had already been able to hold space for each other in that grief?
I would say yes. Although looking back on it now, I mean, during the years we were together, my father died, and I was very, very close to my father. We were with him when he died. My elder brother died. We were in the hospital with him when he died. Um, and Lynn's parents both died. So, but none of those grief experiences were as shattering as what happened for me after Lynn died. Even when her mother died, and I think for most, my mother, by the way, is still alive. But for most of us, losing your mother is a very powerful experience, typically more than your father, just to generalize. Um, Lynn was in shock a little bit, but it wasn't the kind of shattering grief that I know many people go through upon losing their mother or their father. So I would say little yes, a little no. We definitely held space for each other. We definitely comforted each other. We definitely supported each other. Lynn had to go take care of her father a lot over the following few years. Her mother was the more together of that couple, and she was the one who died first. And now he was living alone in New Jersey, and it's in the rural house in New Jersey, and needed a lot of help. And Lynn took the lead among her siblings on organizing that help, which was a way of dealing with her grief, when you think about
Mhm.
it.
I actually yeah, she was, taking action on it. The conversations that you guys had, did you ever talk about your own beliefs about what happened? Since you've, like, had experienced grief, did you
Yes.
talk about your own beliefs about what happens when we die? And so can you share if you ever heard what she felt about death?
She Neither of us was at all religious in the traditional sense. But Lynn hated labels. She wouldn't let you call her an atheist or an agnostic. Her parents were both atheists and proud of it. So, but then they joined a Unitarian congregation. Um, Lynn basically said, "I don't know." This was her belief was, there's more to the world than we understand. I have no idea what happens when you die. She certainly didn't believe in a formal heaven, the kind of thing that is described in Scripture. But she was open to the idea that your soul, your spirit, could go anywhere and do anything, or possibly that basically you go to sleep and it all blacks out and there's nothing. We didn't know.
Didn't know. And the reality is that we only know what we are really told or shared. Like, so the reality is that we don't really know until
Right.
we know. It's
Right.
like there's a sense of feeling. For me, it's a sense of feeling and of the knowing, quote unquote. But it's more of that feeling, right, that you have. Now, since her passing, how has your connection continued with her along the way as you've also then met other people in your life? So, share how you've continued that connection and at the same time opening your heart to new love.
That's a really good question, and is in fact the heart of the last part of my of Carrying the Tiger, the part subtitled "Finding Joy While Grieving." Um, Lynn died. I was shattered. I couldn't do anything for months, really, as happens. Um, and then, and I discovered that I cried huge amounts. That I'm a crier, much more than I ever imagined. And I went through all the kinds of things that you hear about, and I write about them in the book, what it felt like for me. But the sobbing, at the sink, looking at myself in the mirror, saying, I should have died with you. We should have gone together. It's not fair to be left alone here without you. All of that. Uh, and then about 6 weeks, 2 months after Lynn died, while I was preparing her Zoom memorial, which caused me to cry all the time. I'm looking for the photos to show in the slideshow and things like that. Wonderful tears. I wouldn't have it any other way. Um, I invited an acquaintance to Lynn's Zoom memorial, whom I hadn't seen in decades, but her father had lived near here and was one of Lynn's doctors, nothing to do with cancer before that, but practiced right near here. So we had stayed in touch with this woman's father and stepmother, and the stepmother died recently, and we had gone to their memorial. So I invited Cordelia to Lynn's memorial, and Cordelia wrote me an email thanking me and basically saying, "Oh, dear, dear Tony, this means a lot to me. My husband of 32 years just told me he was leaving me." And I'm simplifying the story here somewhat. There were a few emails before that, but I wrote back, "Wow, you're going through the loss of your spouse just as I'm going through the loss of mine." And we connected over that. And we started writing and then calling each other as someone who was deeply grieving. Her stepmother had actually died just a few months before, and she loved her stepmother. And now her husband had left her, and they were trying to figure out how to divide everything up. And they have kids, young adult kids. And Cordelia and I were talking every day, multiple times a day. I really lived for it. While I was preparing Lynn's memorial, doing, I wasn't going to let go of Lynn. Lynn was the love of my life. There was just no question about that. But then one day, Cordelia stopped in the middle of a sentence on the phone and said, "Tony, are you feeling what I'm feeling? Because I've got a big crush on you." And I had to admit that, yes, I felt the same way. So this was immensely confusing. Lynn had given me permission and encouraged me to have another life, to have love if it came to me. But in that conversation, which was actually on the first night of hospice, when we knew she was going to die, one of the most meaningful conversations of my life, but we imagined it would be years. And here I was just a few months later, realizing that I'm attracted to this woman whom I'd never met in person, barely knew what she looked like except a couple of photos. And she lived 1,000 miles away. She came to New York a month or two later, and the physical attraction was very strong, and we went to bed together. Which I should add, now that I've been studying grief and all, I understand that it's actually surprisingly common, or maybe not surprisingly, for people who've gone through the long decline and loss to want the physical pleasure again and to want
Connection.
touch,
Connection.
physical connection. I'm
Mhm.
talking about the intimacy and the connection.
Yeah.
And we certainly wanted that. But damn it, Lynn's urn was sitting on my dresser. Here, the day Cordelia and I first went to bed, I looked up and there was Lynn's urn sitting on the dresser. And no matter what Lynn had said, this freaked me out. I didn't kick Cordy out of bed at that moment. I tried to hide in myself how confused I was. I had a therapist. I went and talked to my therapist. And then Cordy and I talked about it. I would say it took me 2 years of continuing to see Cordy in pieces. She, as I said, she didn't live in New York, so we would see each other when she came to New York, but she did a family on the East Coast. It took me about 2 years of multiple pulling her to me, pushing her away from me, being annoyed by her, being annoyed by all the ways she wasn't Lynn, and she's never going to be Lynn. Some of the things that most attracted me to Lynn, which are her ease of being in the world, her quick sense of humor, the silly little jokes she would just spontaneously make that worked perfectly for me, that's not Cordy. Cordy's very different. We were attracted in multiple ways, and she's very deep, and she loved asking me about Lynn, which, as you, I'm sure, know, as anyone who is listening to grief podcasts on a regular basis or is grieving knows, one of the most valuable, wonderful things you can do for someone who's grieving is ask them about the person they've lost. And Cordy totally didn't know Lynn. So what she wanted those first months, what she wanted in those first months was to ask me about Lynn and hear about Lynn and who was this woman that I loved so much. So building on that foundation over a period of about 2 years, I slowly learned how to navigate the bumps and confusions and hold on to Lynn. And I did that at the end of the book. When you reach the end of Carrying the Tiger, you find this point when I wrote a letter to Lynn telling her that I would hold her in my heart forever. I have photos of her around the house. I have her paintings all around the house. I'm not letting go of those. And the day we buried Lynn's urn, I put that letter in the urn with it. I mean, in the ground with the urn, as a way of saying, I love you. I will love you forever, but I need to now find a way to move on and be open to whatever Cordy may bring me. And that's the last part of my story.
It still continues, and it's still what I love is what you said. First off, you guys connected in the grief, and the fact that you honored that what she had been experiencing of her husband leaving was also grief is huge because there was this a lot of times this comparison in life
Hmm.
of what type of what when someone's grieving, I was like, "Well, it's just, you lost your job. Like that is not something to grieve about. It's not because I have this other thing like this. We're one upping somebody else's
Yes.
experience." And the fact that you were able to honor her grief as what you were going through and connect in that, I think that was really, really something very special because to be seen in your grief is so important, and you guys saw each other in that grief, and the fact that she honored that your love would continue also for Lynn and not and wanting to know more about her is just so great as well because it just there's no competition. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. The competition was all in my head.
yeah.
The competition was in my head, and occasionally I would push Cordy away or reveal to her how much I felt for Lynn. And I had never said such strong words to Cordy. I wasn't ready to say I love you to Cordy.
Mhm.
I'm not. Lynn and I were pretty unromantic and rarely said I love you to each other until the day that we learned she had cancer, at which point we started admitting, having been together 29 years, we started admitting, actually, this is deep love. You're the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. And those kinds of lovely things that most couples say to each other a lot more often and starting a lot earlier.
Mm.
But they don't come easily to me saying I love
Mhm.
you. And I certainly wasn't going to start saying I love you to Cordy during those few years while I was trying to figure out where to put my love for Lynn, how to hang on to it. I'm not going to walk away from it. I mean, look, I've written this whole book, which is in large part a love letter to Lynn. You really understand her and what we had
Yes.
by the end of Carrying the Tiger.
No, it's just, I always feel it's like uh, I have kids, and so when you're gonna have a second one, sometimes you feel like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna love this other baby? Like if I already have this one, like is it? It's not gonna. It's your heart just grows bigger, and then you have room, so you don't have to put Lynn anywhere else other than staying in your heart, and it still make room for Cordelia and for so that's what is so beautiful about love. It's not finite. And it also doesn't have to be something you say in words. Like you said, you showed your love to each other, you and Lynn, through your entire lives by the respect and the way that you treat each other. And so they didn't have to say I love you to know that you loved each other either.
Yes, one of my absolute favorite comments in the Amazon reviews is from someone who read the book and said some beautiful things and then basically said, this book is a wonderful love story told almost entirely by actions.
Hmm.
It's the story of me caring for Lynn, of helping her die, of how she responded to me, of how she cared for me when the caregiving. When I had a breakdown after about a year of trying to hold it all together in the first year of caring for Lynn. And then she ended up caring for me
Mm.
despite being quite ill at that week. Um, that's the love story. It's what
It's
we
good.
did
Love is
for each
an
other.
action. Yeah,
Yes.
love is an action. It's not a word. Yes, it's we think of it only as when we say it to somebody, but it is. It's an action. So I love that that was your review. So talking about the book and the reviews, let's tell people how they can get Carrying the Tiger.
So, Carrying the Tiger is in wide distribution. You can get it on Amazon. Just search for Carrying the Tiger or any of its competitors, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, all those places. It's available in as an audiobook, so it's on Spotify and Audible, and as an ebook, so it's on various sites like Kobo that carry ebooks. The easiest way, other than just going to Amazon and searching for Carrying the Tiger, is to go to my website, tonystewartauthor.com. And right on the homepage, if you click the order the book button, it takes you to a page where I've put links to all of these locations. So you can go straight to it on Amazon or Kobo or Bookshop or Barnes and Noble or wherever you want, or Audible. And it'll take you right to Tiger's page. And you can download it or
And
order
that's
it.
what I'll link then below in the show notes will be your website so that people can go straight there, be able to know. And who knows in the future,
Mhm.
more now that you already are Tony Stewart author, more books to come now that you've opened this new found love for writing and it
Yes.
was a way of expressing. We'll see what well you said that it could be a 300-page book just to share how you met with Lynn. So that might be the prequel we'll be looking for.
Yes.
So be on the lookout for the prequel of the Carrying the Tiger.
Birthing the
Actually,
tiger or something like
birthing the
that.
tiger, yeah. And let's talk, Carrying the Tiger. Tiger was this the representation of this title has to do with
This,
cancer.
this
Can you share the choice of the of the title of the book?
Absolutely. It comes from an email that a friend wrote to Lynn about a month into our journey, which basically said, in our Tai Chi group, we carry a tiger for a friend who is going through difficult circumstances, facing challenges. The three motions of bending low, picking up the tiger, and putting it on a hilltop far away make that tiger so much less threatening. Lynn and I had never heard about this, but she wrote back to her friend saying, I love that. Would you please carry a tiger for me? And also, could you teach me how to carry tigers?
Oh,
And
love it. And so that is the reasoning of
of
the
the,
book,
yeah,
of the title of the book. Okay, Tony, I usually ask this as I'm ending the podcast. It's been so lovely talking to you and hearing your story and just you just have such a beautiful light and energy and it's just been lovely to get to know you through this conversation.
thank you.
Aside from also getting to know you through the book, I love one-on-one conversations. Now, tell us if there's anything I have not asked you that you want to make sure that the listeners get it, whether it's about your own story, about grief, whatever you feel.
The main thing I would like people to know is that although there are hard events in Carrying the Tiger, it is a memoir. You're looking over my shoulder as I go through all of these experiences, make wrong turns, and learn from it. Most people reading the book say that they come away inspired. There's a lot of joy in it. Yes, you inherently we went through some very difficult experiences, and some of the cancer, some of the hospital events were very hard. But reading the book is not depressing. I've listened to some of my podcast interviews and thought, wow, no one's going to buy the book because it just sounds like I'm talking about all these difficult things. And actually, I hope, and the comments that I'm getting back and the reviews have said that reading it is an inspiring experience, not a depressing one.
I think that that is the case for everything. I tell this to people about even the podcast. I say it's not like people are like, "Oh my gosh, you must feel so heavy every time you interview somebody." I'm like, "No, I don't. I actually feel so much joy and lightness after I've had conversations for the podcast because it is. It's not something eh, that it has to be heavy. Grief is heavy, but it doesn't. There's so much more to it around it too. And I can see that with the book as well. And just even just talking with you, I'm sure that people will be able to connect to what you just said, that it really is a love story shown by actions of how much you cared for Lynn and continue caring for her. So thank you
Okay.
for carrying the tiger and and to you, Tony. Thank
You're
you.
you're very welcome, Kendra.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.